Hello and welcome to Identity Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 162. We're back after a New Year break of about a week and a half. The topic today is the death of identity. Our guest, as you can probably see, is Bob Blakely, co-founder and chief product officer at Mimic. And Bob has a long and illustrious career, IBM alum, Gardner analyst, worked for Citibank and other notable assignments. But Bob, why don't you say hello and tell us a little bit about your career before we dive into the death of identity?
Sure. Hi, Mike. And of course, Happy New Year. And thank you very much for inviting me. It was great to see you, just before the new year. And I very much appreciate the invitation. So, as you said, I've been kicking around the identity business for many years. I did a whole bunch of things at IBM and then ended up through a series of bizarre accidents, becoming one of the co-editors of the SAML specification. So that was sort of my baptism of fire in the identity community. And eventually, after working on a bunch of related things, I left IBM to join Burton Group, which I'm sure all of the Identity online watching us remember fondly as one of the heads of the identity and privacy service there. And we were eventually acquired by Gartner because, of course, Gartner would acquire the best, right? And so I spent a couple of years leading the identity and privacy practice for the Gartner for Technical Professionals service. And then following that, I went on to a career in finance at Citibank for about 8 years. And then after that, moved into full-time venture capital work. And of course, what happens to old venture capitalists is they become startup executives. So now I'm co-founder at Mimic, where we do ransomware defense for enterprises.
Okay, that was a great quick overview. So let's dive into the death of identity. And I mentioned this is one of the more challenging homework assignments. In chronological order, there was a story from 15th century Eastern Europe about a ceremony to create a golem by writing truth on its forehead, a 1984 ACM lecture on how you need to trust people who write the software, and a 2007 white paper on ceremonies as a potential construct for modeling human actions, or modeling human actions, let's say, interacting with software protocols. So how do these three things relate to the death of identity?
So sure, and I'll do this as a story. I brought props, by the way, so we can have a little
Props
visual.
are welcome.
So I'll start maybe. So what is a ceremony? Kim Cameron used to describe the importance of ceremonies in designing identity systems. A ceremony is a notion that Carl Ellison coined in the paper that I put in the homework. And the idea is in the electronic world, you have protocols, right? You have one electronic entity talking to another electronic entity, and a protocol describes the sequence of messages that they send back and forth to communicate to one another. And Carl's realization was that humans are not electronic entities, right? And so they can't really participate in protocols, among other things, because they're not deterministically programmed, right?
They might do anything.
They might indeed do anything.
Yeah.
And so a ceremony is like, you imagine you have a human. Here's a notional human, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have an electronic entity. And you can imagine, and here's the electronic entity. This, by the way, is a golem. For those of you who don't, are not up on your golem imagery. And you can imagine them talking to each other on the little telephone in the jail. You've got the prisoner and you've got the lawyer separated by a bulletproof glass wall, and they're talking to each other, but they can't exchange anything other, than conversation. So in the early days, uh, we invented identity because we had, canonically a Unix system, a resource in the electronic world that the program was going to do something to. And we had a human who wanted to tell the program what to do. And we imagined that the resource was valuable, right? And so maybe as an example, you have me, and in the electronic world, we have a bank account, my bank account, and then you have this, this electronic entity, and I want to tell the electronic entity, hey, uh, go take $1,000 from my bank account and send it to Precision Camera so that I can get a new lens, right? And and that like kind of worked, except we began to be worried that somebody who wasn't me would say, "Hey, go take $1,000 from Bob's bank account and send it down, to Interstellar Barbecue and order lunch for the company." And so what we did was we said, "Well, okay." Here's the human, and it is saying to the electronic entity, uh, I'm Bob. And so we got the electronic entity, the golem, here to say, okay, well, show me your ID, right? So that you can prove that you're Bob. So this was the fundamental question that we were trying to solve with identity, right? What is the nature of the human on the human side of the wall? And of course, it's really complicated, right? Because I can't pass the ID through the glass. It won't go through the glass. All I can do is kind of hold it up to the glass. And so what the golem is getting here is just a picture of the ID, right? And maybe it can say, well, it might be a fake ID, so show me your fingerprint, and I can push my finger up against the glass, but at the end of the day, all that shows up in the electronic part of the world is electrons, right? Which are pictures of the artifacts of identity. So this question of how do I know what the thing on the human side of the glass is, uh, was what we viewed as the hard question. And we spent a lot of effort working on this question. But we were still stuck in this, I'll say, Unix philosophy of the world, uh, uh, in which the golem was very simple, right? The Unix philosophy was a program should do exactly one thing and do it very well, right? So the golem was in the machine was in a very real sense as simple as it could get, and it had I'll call it
This isn't an Emacs golem then,
this
or
is
a
this
VI golem.
I was unable to operate the foot pedals on the Emacs system, so I was a VI guy. But the thing about the sort of Unix epic programs is that they had something like a unitary will, right? So
Like
they
grep or awk, for
yeah,
example.
like grep or awk, or open a file or something like that. And so our concept of the golem, and so by the way, let me divert for a moment. The historical golem, the golem of Prague, created by Rabbi Yehuda Loew, was something that was sculpted out of earth, and it received its instructions from its maker via a little scroll with words on it that was put in its forehead, right, or in its mouth, and in some of the variants of the tail. And the idea of the golem was that it was essentially a perfect robot slave. It would do exactly what you told it to and nothing else, right? Uh, as it turned out, the golem wasn't a perfect robot slave, but also it kind of didn't matter whether it was a perfect robot slave because the inventor of the golem, the rabbi, was incapable of giving perfect instructions, right? And in the end, the reason the golem had to be destroyed was because the rabbi assumed that that no being would violate the rules of the Sabbath, so he forgot to tell it not to violate the rules of the Sabbath, and it went out and started doing whatever it was going to do on any other day except doing it on Saturday, and so he had
Turn
to
the light switch on Saturday.
That's right. Yeah, it was fixing to go kindle a fire or something like that, and so he had to take the words out, the hem out of its forehead, and then it crumbled into dust.
I
So
thought you were going to relate. So the word that he writes in the scroll is the Hebrew word for truth, which is
yes,
emet. Also the name of a Israeli integration firm. um,
indeed, and what
and I
he
was
did.
wondering if you were going to relate the word itself, because I saw in the articles, in the 1984 article, you say trust the programmers. In this, and I saw a relationship between the word truth. Why does it say truth? What's this? Do you see a significance in truth as the activating word?
So the end of the story is actually Rabbi Lowe doesn't actually take the scroll out of the forehead of the golem. What he does is he erases one letter, and emet becomes met, which means death, right? And so that's what causes the golem to crumble. I suspect that the reason that the word is truth is because there had to be this piece of wordplay that allowed one letter to change the meaning of the word from one thing into another.
I wonder. The other thing is that word emet also means the beginning, middle, and end, because it is the first, middle, and last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And
Mhm.
so the word truth also implies a spectrum sort of experience. And so I don't
Well,
know. It's
and,
an interesting story.
so it's a pretty good transition, right? So here we have me, right? And we have my perfect robot slave, which is a very simple Unix program, right? Over time, the programs that I was instructing got more and more complicated, right? And so we didn't really notice that the golem no longer had a unitary will, right? We didn't notice that the designer of the operating system and that the designer of the compiler uh, uh, had a say in what the golem was going to do, in addition to me. And our identity infrastructure doesn't ask who those people are or what their motivations are. And this was Ken Thompson's observation in Reflections on Trusting Trust, right? That the designer of the compiler could put things into the code that you didn't know about. And so if you gave your bank account number to a golem that his compiler had compiled, and the golem noticed that you had $1 million instead of $1,000 in your account, it would just wire the money to the compiler designer, and he could buy a private island and live out the rest of his life in peace. And in a sense, that problem was like a little bit theoretical for a long time, but it's much less theoretical now, right? Because we don't just have compiler designers. There's the famous XKCD cartoon about all of the infrastructure in the internet depending on one little open source project that's maintained by a guy in Nebraska on the weekends, right? The golem these days Originally, so first it was a perfect robot slave, right? It had a unitary will. And then after that, it was kind of a corporation. It had a board of directors, right? The compiler writer, the operating system writer, maybe a few others, and you. Uh, now it's become, kind of a mob, right? So lots of open source project maintainers and other things have an influence on the behavior that this thing is going to exhibit. And the point at which I think it becomes super obvious that we are no longer dealing with an entity whose behavior we can reliably predict is when we talk to an AI agent, right? Because the AI agent, I mean, sure, somebody wrote the code that runs the LLM, uh, but that isn't really the biggest part of the problem. The biggest part of the problem is that every piece of training data that the LLM gets exposed to adds another member to the board of directors. And so when we talk about hallucinations, what we really mean is we added a new piece of data to the training set, and the new piece of data changed the behavior of the golem in an unpredictable way, and we didn't and it nothing we weren't informed of that. So now, when I present my ID to the golem and I say, I would like you to transfer $1,000 from my bank account to Precision Camera, in a very real sense, that is not the only instruction that this thing is getting, right? It's getting instructions from all sorts of people who are really on this side of the glass, right? But we don't know who they are. We don't know what the instructions are. And the question we never asked in identity was, what is the nature of the thing we are instructing, right? We thought it was this. We thought it was the perfect robot slave. But it is not this, right? It is this enormously complicated entity which has motivations and instructions that are unknowable to us, that don't come from us. So, like, we're we're not the only identity in the room, regardless of we're the only identity that's showing a driver's license, but we're not the only identity that is giving instructions.
Did you see the Apple TV series Murderbot?
Not yet. I've read the first couple of books, though.
Oh, okay, great. And Martha Wells is a Texan author she lives in College Station. You can think of it's
Giga Maggies, by the way.
What's that?
Giga Maggies, by the way. I grew up in Bryan.
Okay, great. And so, when I just realized this comparison, but this 15th century story about a mud man that becomes like an artificial being, let's say, is used as a weapon, is used for defense. And then we have Murderbot, that same analogy, set in the future, but with a more realistic context of what an IT environment might look like. The thing that's interesting about Murderbot is that I think Martha Wells, her husband works at IT, I think at A&M, and I see a lot of IT talk in the Murderbot. For example, he's an entity. He's armed and potentially could kill people. But he has several systems, and one of those systems is a governor module that controls him, what he can do. And he hacks that governor module and sort of retains free will. And that's the premise of the books, is that he's an independent agent. But he's accountable in that even though he hacks his governor module, he still has to send information and data because he's being monitored. And if they detect he's gone rogue, they'll take him offline potentially or kill him even. And he also has a risk assessment module because rules are not absolute. Like whether you should do something or not, like should you shoot at the ship or not? Well, you shouldn't shoot at the ship, but maybe if you can save a human, you should. And so while he's disconnected and autonomous, even though he's governed, he still has to sort of make these decisions which are complicated and which I think your Golem story, the Golem story from the 15th century, starts to actually hint at some of these challenges. One detail I remember I heard in the version that we assigned in the homework was that the Golem didn't want to be decommissioned.
That's right. And
Is
so
the
to
Golem a person? Would be my follow-up question.
so uh, so so I don't think that the golem is a person. Uh, it- that's a very complicated discussion, and I don't think that anybody should just take my word for it. Right? So the fact that I don't think it's a person doesn't mean that you shouldn't think it's a person. But but does it? But that's distinct from the question of whether it has its own preferences and desires in some way that is not personified, right?
It
So in the
clearly is a different entity than the human, though. That's 100% clear, and it's also very complicated. So if we table the human question, like is it a person rather, um, Um, so what are, to me, it seems like a governance that problem, and that I think your system analogy with Unix is also good. So I think people tend to sometimes conflate AI with an LLM. Um, and in this case, as a chess player, I think about maybe an opening library versus analysis phase, um, where an AI agent like Murderbot or the Golem, or an e-commerce agent buying you a plane ticket, there are a number of systems sort of connected together. So it might query an LLM when it needs an analysis, but it also has another system which is doing audit and another system which is maybe governing its behavior. So an AI agent is a collection of systems, and the LLM is really just a reasoning query database engine of a special type. It's not AI at all.
so they, I guess, um, so I agree with all of that. I guess to go back to Murderbot for a minute, right? Murderbot has an intrinsic motivation, which is hilarious, right? What it really wants to do is watch soap operas all day, right?
Streaming, not soap operas. These are dramatic episodes of great moral value.
Uh, and as you mentioned, right, the Golem of Prague also had an intrinsic motivation, right? And so uh, those motivations, you could ask where do those arise, right? Is that something which is an emergent phenomenon because of the nature of the thing, or is designers of the system pulling the strings on that motivation, right? In either case, uh, that motivation is not reflecting my will, the identity of the will of the thing with the identity, right? So here's me. By the way, this is a fake New York State pilot's license for John F. Kennedy Jr. Dark
The
sense of humor.
resolution's not good enough. Don't worry.
So that doesn't reflect my will. So identity as a determinant of what that will ought to be allowed to do has already broken down, right? Because the watching of the soap opera isn't something that I asked for. And here I think, if we were allowed to add a fourth reading, which would of course be, Asimov and the three laws of robotics, the intuition here, I think, is right. The three laws of robotics are there to be completely identity independent constraints on the set of actions that are allowable and the hierarchy of those, right? So Asimov was looking at a system which was too complicated to authorize, right? It had too much behavior to put a set of rules in place for. And so what he said was, well, no matter what, let's not have it kill humans, right? That's, baseline. That is an identity independent uh, policy. Nobody, so no matter what is giving instructions to the robot, it is going to say, yeah, I'm not going to kill people. I kind of, when I talk about the death of identity, this is kind of what I'm getting at, right? Which is there are so many identities that are in the mix that might be trying to issue an instruction that we can't depend on if we're going to make the system reliable and safe, we can't depend on knowing the identity and knowing the motivations of the identity. We have to have a set of rules which are uh, designed to be protective regardless of whose will is being expressed. Like if you go into an auto assembly factory and there's a bunch of these robots that have, big arms, the basic protection there is they're bolted to the floor and there's a piece of yellow and black stripy tape around their maximum range of motion, and you don't walk into that, right? And so the basic rule is the robot can't reach outside of the tape, and that has nothing to do with identity or the purpose for which the robot is being deployed.
I'm inclined to be sympathetic to the topic, the death of identity, although I would qualify it a little bit, and I would say more like the death of the primacy of human identity as the core of authorization, which isn't quite as catchy as your title. Am I on the right track though?
Well, so you probably remember that when I introduced myself, I always used to say, "Hi, I'm Bob. I'm in the drama department at IBM, or I'm in the drama department at Citi." So these short, punchy things, cause people to remember things. What I really want people to focus on is, we used to think that identity meant what is the nature of this thing, right? And it is. We are now in a situation where it is clearly, by the way, for those of you who are not watching on video, what we used to think that identity meant what is the nature of the thing on the human side of the ceremony, right? And I think what's missing and what is increasingly obviously necessary is to answer the question, what is the nature of the thing on the electronic side of the ceremony, on that side of the pane of glass, and what is its relationship to identities and wills and instructions and controllability and what have you. And until we have an attitude toward that, uh, we're not even going to have framed the problem in a way that is that admits of solutions, right? So I'm really trying here to get people to think about the nature of the thing on the electronic side of the fence and whether that is characterized by something we might call identity or whether it's a totally different phenomenon and needs to be controlled differently.
I mean, I would agree. For years, I've been saying that people forget about the software that's acting on on their
Yeah.
behalf. In SAML, we used to call it the user agent would be like the browser, and
Yes.
the SP would be this piece of software running in the cloud. So we might say there's a user agent and there's a relying party and there's an identity provider, and they all need to be governed. What we've seen is that over the years, that the user agent is now potentially gotten more sophisticated, right? And it might actually be an AI agent that's getting your consent and acting when you're offline, or collecting information and processing it and making decisions and then performing actions on different resources. So
So
the
I,
software is getting more complicated.
so I'm really glad you said it that way because that clarifies a thing that I think is really important, right? I think the fundamental false assumption in identity is that the user agent and the user are the same in some way. And that is absolutely not the case, right? So the user agent is imbued with what is actually a name that represents the identity of the user, which is a human, and it's sitting in the world of protons and neutrons. But the user agent only sits in the world of electrons, and it is absolutely, fundamentally, irreducibly not the same as the user, right? And
Yeah.
that's the myth that we have to dispel.
If I can reference Murderbot just one more time, in Murderbot, they have a character, Gurothin, who has an interface where he can plug into, maybe he has a USB like finger port or something, and he can plug into digital systems and it connects to his neurons and he can interact in a limited way, not as advanced as Murderbot, but he can interact in a limited way electronically. And I know science fiction sometimes leads, like the crazy things we read about in science fiction sometimes happen. And I wonder if this could actually happen where humans might actually have an augmented interface installed that allowed them to break that through that glass window that you're talking about.
So I think that idea traces back at least to William Gibson and Neuromancer, right? Of the interface. Uh,
Right. And I was also going to mention, I gave a talk, I think, in 2014 about the meat space, a South by talk about the meat space and cyberspace, and the meat space being, pieces of meat walking around. So I think this follows his idea very closely also of this fundamental impedance mismatch between organic and digital spaces.
well, and the thing that we have learned over a long period of time is that in the electronic world, it is impossible to prevent the making of perfect copies, right? And so that means that uh, any signifier of identity in the electronic world can, in principle, be forged, right? And so the ceremonies, to go back to Carl Ellison, right, are designed to make bad guys work too hard to accomplish the forgery, right? That's the purpose of the ceremony, is you're signaling through the glass in the jail, and eventually the thing on the human side, just breaks down because it has to do too much work and can't complete the forgery. But it's increasingly clear that it's going to be really hard for us to maintain the effort advantage, right? And perfect copies are going to be the order of the day.
Right, and AI is I've had at least 3 episodes on AI deepfakes and how the best AI deepfake detection now is like 95% effective.
Yeah.
So um, yeah, now all of this to me seems to point to a need for governance, because if we're saying there's this that somehow assuming we won't be able to connect digitally for the time being. We're going to need to trust this golem to act on our behalf. And the only way that that's really going to happen, assuming that I can't write all the software like we thought we maybe could in 1984, and I can't even review all the code because it's open software today is built on a mountain of open source. Normally, where there's a little bit of value proprietary stuff at the top, but there's no way we can review all the software supply chain. And so, at a certain sense, really, this comes down to us as humans being able to trust the software is acting on our behalf as we hoped, and then the way that trust comes about is normally through some type of economies of scale of using an enterprise that's going to make agreements with software vendors to deliver you software that's trustworthy. Um, and but also the harder part Because I think, we have the software supply chain and S-bombs, like that's sort of solved. But the hardest part is, how do I know that the policies how do I know that the golem won't kill anybody, but it only kills like enemy soldiers who are attacking? And so the governance of these agents and the rules by which they live in starts to become complicated. And I feel like that's really the missing piece.
Well, so Dan Gear so number one, you cannot trust the software. That was the point of including Ken Thompson's Turing Award lecture in the reading, right? Is the idea that even if you can read the source code, trusting the software is a fool's errand. It's really the case. Dan Gear.
But we use software, right? So it's like, yeah, I can't trust it, but I can't not participate in society either. So it's a contract of adhesion where I need to use software.
And so I am going to get to that a little bit. So Dan Gear had this observation that authorization doesn't scale, but accountability does. Right. And what he meant was, you can't imagine all of the bad things that might happen in advance and write a rule that says don't do that. Right. Because the set of bad behavior, this is the Turing completeness thing, right? Turing complete machine has infinitely much behavior. By some definition, good behavior is a defined finite subset, and therefore the remaining subset, the bad behavior, is still infinite. You can't enumerate it. You can't write that exclude it, right? So, but you can observe that something happened, classify it as good or bad, and go back and punish people if it's bad. But so that's Dan Gear's argument, and I'm never going to argue with Dan. I think he's the smartest guy in the computer security business. But my conclusion from this is a little bit different, right? Which is the path forward, I think, is not governance. I think the path forward is eliminating the Turing completeness, right? I think the path forward is taking the applications that we really care about, that have to be safe, and essentially turning them into special purpose machines instead of general purpose machines. So imposing constraints that, completely independent of identity and completely independent of policy, simply do not allow them to do a really broad range of things which they shouldn't do. So just ironclad constraints.
These are guardrails. We need to set the guardrails and know that these are absolutely the guardrails 100%.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we're working on at Mimic, right? Is taking a thing which was built to be an application running on a general purpose system, and constraining it in such a way that its behavior is effectively special purpose.
It aligns a lot with Cedar's take on analyzability, requiring that you have to constrain the things you need. You need to define the schema, because if there's an infinite schema, you can't prove that there's no corner cases. And so so in that sort of analysis, we would say everything that we can express as Cedar policies, we can reason and analyze over, and anything that's not maybe requires manual human approval. So I'm with you on this idea, but I think it's actually still more complicated than that. Let me just give a quick self-driving car example. Or self-driving truck. Let's say you have a self-driving truck, and it has a rule that says you should stop if the brakes are within this limit of wear. But then that alert goes off, but you're in a tunnel, and should you block the tunnel, or should you get through the tunnel and then pull over? And so even defining even those absolute rules still need some type of overall, like, I just think that there's always, it's easy to say, we want to constrain this, but actually constraining it is really difficult.
Actually, constraining it is indeed really difficult. That is the case. But on the other hand, if you compare really difficult with creating a security policy which is going to prevent all bad things from happening, which is actually impossible. Maybe really difficult is better.
I have a guest coming on January 15th, Lewin Wanzer, and he sort of makes the case that that humans always have to use AI as a tool, and that we should never be governed by AI. So ultimately, you still need the human review. So we can make those policies, but still the humans still have to be in control. And if the humans have to be in control, then I think that we need some type of process to figure out how do we review and how do we know how do we make these systems. And that world, I just think we're not really ready for yet.
So, there's this famous slide from IBM in 1979. The old style acetate foil slides, which Google search finds it immediately, which simply read, "A computer can never be held accountable, therefore a computer must never make a management decision." Right? It's the idea that uh, that we shouldn't allow processes that in principle exclude human accountability. It's a good rule, right? I mean, again, it might not be possible to live by the rule every single time, but whenever you can, it seems to me you should.
Right. So we're at 41 minutes. I'll give you the option. Can we go over like 5 minutes?
It's entirely up to you. I have the time.
Let's go over because this is a rare opportunity to chat about, I think, this important topic. And so, okay, so humans need. I mean, we still obviously want humans in control. I think we have the discretion. There was a really funny article in the Wall Street Journal about how the Anthropic set up a vending machine for journalists.
Oh, yeah. I loved that, and it lost like a lot of money.
They tricked it to get goldfish and PlayStations, and they convinced it was communist. And so then Anthropic installed a CEO module who's like, I will make money, I will not lose money. And then they confused the CEO module by sending it false articles of incorporation that showed that its goal should be to make Wall Street journalists employees happy. And so, and that's a good example. That CEO module maybe is like your early governor module. Like and how we need this need for multiple systems interacting. And maybe I think they think we're further than we actually are in the agentic world, partially because they confuse LLM responses with actual agentic AI. And I think those two things are very different. But I wanted to actually pivot. The last topic we'll pivot onto is the topic is the death of identity. And you've mentioned a couple of times how accountability scales and how accountability is important. And I also believe that a well-governed system should minimize risk, and it should maximize accountability. And that accountability could mean a person, but it could also mean a department or an organization or an entity or also a piece of software. And I see identity where the reason I say I think we need the death of human-centric identity authorization, I feel confident about that. But I still see identity as a really important layer, because without identity, we can't have accountability. We still need to know which person, which AI agent, which department, which third-party vendor did this. And we need to issue, if we have a lot of vendors, people, and software we're dealing with, we need to issue them identifiers, and we need to be able to identify them if there's a problem. So is it the expansion of identity or the death of identity?
So the point that I'm driving at here is what identity has been trying to do is you have the human and you have the robot slave, right? The golem. And what identity has been trying to do is implement a system where the robot slave takes on the identity of the human, right? So we have this situation where the golem is carrying the human on its back and using it to say, "Hey, this is the thing that's accountable for
Yeah,
my
that's a
actions."
fantasy.
And the real deal is the golem. To quote Walt Whitman, I think contains multitudes, right? And the important thing for accountability is to determine which of the humans who had input into the will and action of the golem uh, should be assigned accountability for a particular action that it takes. Sometimes it is indeed the human who went through the authentication ceremony, but sometimes it isn't, right? Sometimes it's one of the programmers, sometimes it's somebody who trained an AI model.
Hacker.
Accountability, if it's only limited to the person, to the human in the authentication ceremony, is never going to get is never going to be guaranteed to get the answer right.
Right. Cool. Well, this has been I've been looking forward to this episode for a long time. We're really happy to see you at the holiday meetup in Austin. I think we're going to do that again next year. I think the right number of events for Austin is 2.
So the city in general has put on a lot more than that, and it does complicate the traffic situation a lot. I got to say that.
Yeah, I think we'll do an Austin Identity meetup, and I think maybe one at South by, because a lot of people sometimes are in for South by. Eve was here for South by last time.
Yep.
But yeah, more than that, I think people don't come and show up. But anyway, it was a lot of fun actually, and we have some great beer venues in Austin, and food venues. So with that, I will say, well, Bob. Actually, I'm sorry, I forgot. Last thoughts. Anything you want to say that I forgot to ask you? Next events. Where can we see you next? Before we break.
So I'll probably be at Black Hat and at RSA. I won't be speaking at either of those, but you can catch me. And a lot of you probably already have my cell number. Ping me on that. If not, ping me on LinkedIn. I very much appreciate the opportunity, Mike, to be on the office hours and to talk to all of my old friends and colleagues in the identity community. And I should say, for the record, what I'm working on now is ransomware defense. The company is called Mimic. We are implementing some of the ideas that I've been talking about here today. And if you think that you might have a need for ransomware defense, come and talk to us.
Ransomware is a truly terrifying combination of cryptocurrency and hacking. And let me just quickly announce the next episode. For the second time, we have a guest from the Dominican Republic, Armando Pena, who's building a citizen ID system in DR. And it's really interesting. Actually, a lot of other nations are further ahead from the United States, not surprisingly, in national identity. And it's really good to learn from them on what they're doing and what's working and not working. So they've been working really hard in DR to do this. So looking forward to that. And with that, I'll say, Bob, thank you so much for coming on. It's really been a pleasure to get a chance to visit with you for a couple of minutes. And thank